For those of you who haven't met, my name is Josh, and I'm one of the pastors here at Cypress. And this weekend, we are celebrating our 250th birthday as a nation, which is awesome. And in true American fashion, we celebrate by overeating hot dogs and blowing things up. Does everyone here still have 10 fingers? Is everyone good? Check? Okay, good. We all made it through. I figured out that for the 4th of July party, there are two kinds of people. The first one is the one who loves to light all of the fireworks, maybe tries to jump through them sometimes. That person who throws them at their friends' feet. Do we have anyone in here like that? Yeah, we got a couple. All right. Yeah, that's me too. That's my job. And the other person is the person that's on standby with the hose and the bucket of water, right? We've got some of those too. Trying to make sure that the neighborhood does not burn down. And the block party and the world need both of these kinds of people. And in my family, we have both of these kinds of people represented in two of my children every 4th of July. And in our family, we love 4th of July. It's probably our second favorite holiday as a family, right after Christmas. And I brought some pictures because I wanted to prove to you that I have both of these, that I have a hose-holding kid and I have a future 9-fingered child as well. So first, this is Logan. Logan is my oldest. This is from several years ago, not just yesterday. And Logan is 5 years old when this picture is taken. And Logan loves fireworks from a safe distance. As long as he's away from them and he's regularly reminding people to follow the rules. He's the kid that reads all that fine print on the side of the firework to make sure we're doing it safely and correctly. And then my other son, Jackson, is right here. He is our fire starter, and he's 3 years old in this picture, again from a few years ago, and he has no fear. He always wants the biggest fireworks. He wants one that he can hold. Every year he's asking me hey, Dad, can we get people in our neighborhood? Those ones that shoot up in the air and explode, that would be so cool. I'm no, those are illegal. We can't get those. But he is our wild child. And you may have noticed Logan in the background of this picture. Logan is distraught by what is happening here. He is very disturbed by what is happening. And again, we need both of these kinds of people in the world. Logan will make sure that his brothers are safe and stay alive, and Jackson will make sure that they have fun. And every year in July, Americans across our country, similar to our family, they get together and have parties and celebrations, and it's a day that we come together and we celebrate our independence. And we are truly blessed to live in a country that allows us the freedom to join together like this and to worship. And we celebrate a day that we declared that we no longer needed a king. And while we are proud and blessed to be American, we know that there is a king that we serve and a kingdom that we are a part of above anything here on earth. So during this month that we celebrate our independence, we want to remind ourselves that we should be living in dependence on God. And if you like that play on words, Pastor Zach came up with that. I thought it was pretty creative. That our job is to live in dependence on God. And our theme verse, like Courtney said this morning, for this series is John 15:5. John 15:5. And we are going to challenge our whole church to memorize this together. So this is the core verse for every week of this series. And we want you to memorize it. So today we have it on the screen. We're going to read it together. But starting next week, we're going to challenge you to say it as a congregation together without it up on the screen. And we'll try to memorize this together throughout this month as a church. So right now, we're going to read it all together. We'll start by reading the text and then reading the reference, the John 15:5, where it comes from. All right, is everyone ready? All right, so it goes like this. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. John 15:5. All right, we're going to have to be a little better next week, okay? It was okay, but I know you guys can do better. So you have that on your take-home sheet. Put a reminder in your phone to work on it this whole week. Let's memorize this together as a church. This is the point of this series, is that Jesus is the vine and we are the branches. We abide in him, and separate from him, we can do nothing. Nothing of meaning. We are dependent on him for everything. And today I want to go through a story in the Bible that illustrates this point, that we are fully independent on God and that his plan for us is to be dependent on him first and then on each other. Specifically as part of a church, this is what we are called to do. This is what we are called to do in order to accomplish what God desires. If you have your Bible with you this morning, we're going to be in the book of Nehemiah. If you don't have a Bible with you, there is one on the seat, underneath the seat in front of you, underneath you. Please grab that. We want to read the word of God together. And if you do not own a Bible, that is yours to keep. Take it home with you. So Nehemiah is it's in the Old Testament. It's about a third of the way through the book. And chronologically, it actually happens much later than the spot that it's placed. It happens really kind of towards the very end of the story of the Old Testament. So anything that you know from the Old Testament has probably happened before we get up to Nehemiah. And like much of the Old Testament, this is a story about God's chosen people, the nation of Israel. So to catch us up on how we got here, I'm going to do as quick as I can, a summary leading up to the book of Nehemiah, okay? So first, in the very beginning, we're going to start all the way at the beginning. In the very beginning, God created everything in 7 days. Well, he created it in 6 days, and then he rested on the seventh day. He created humans as well during that time. And pretty early on, humans messed everything up. They sinned against God, and that sin spread throughout the world, and God needed to start all over. And there was a flood and an ark and a guy named Noah. After Noah, a guy came along named Abraham, and Abraham is promised that he is going to be the father of God's chosen people, of the nation of Israel. And his grandson Joseph is eventually thrown into a pit and sold, and then eventually becomes a ruler in the land of Egypt. And when he becomes a ruler, he moves all of his family to Egypt, all of God's chosen people to Egypt. The Israelites are moved to Egypt, and it goes okay for a little bit, and then they are enslaved by the Egyptians. It turns horrible. And after they're enslaved, a man named Moses is sent by God to rescue his people from slavery. There's some locusts, there's some frogs, there's some boils, there's some death, and God's people are freed. Pharaoh finally lets the people go. So after this, they cross the Red Sea on dry land. They get some commandments from God, and instead they decide to worship a golden calf. And God's like, why don't you worship me? And they're like, we got bored. So as a punishment, they are forced to wander the desert for 40 years. Eventually, they enter the promised land and they conquer it with the help of God. But Israel starts to get jealous of some of the nations around them. All these nations have kings, and so they decide that they want a king. And God's like, I thought I was your king. And they're like, no, we want a person. So he puts Saul as the first king of God's people. But low-key, Saul's bad at his job. So David is chosen by God to be king, and Saul does not like this, so he tries to kill David. David runs away, he hides in some caves, gets a little emo, gets really sad, gets really emotional, gets really inspired, and writes down some poetry while he's living in these caves. And Saul dies eventually, and David comes and takes over as king. David has some mishaps along the way, but he is a man after God's own heart. Then eventually his son Solomon takes over, and he follows God's plan to build the temple. And the temple is God's dwelling place among his people. Solomon also takes some time to write some things down. He writes a lot of wisdom down that's in the Bible, and he writes some poems as well that we skip over in the treehouse about one of his wives. Then Israel is eventually defeated by Babylon. They are divided, and they are exiled, and they are no longer living in the promised land that was given to them by God. And a bunch of prophets come along and they tell of consequences coming up for the Israelites. They tell about how to live for God, and they talk about a promise that is coming one day in a man named Jesus. And then we arrive in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, where we'll start our story today. So the Israelites at this point are scattered in the wind. They are among all of the nations. They are kind of all over the place. Some of them still in Jerusalem, some of them in Syria, some of them in Babylon. They're kind of all over. And this story takes place 50 years after Babylonian captivity. The book of Ezra and Nehemiah were originally written as a single work. And then when the people who put the Bible together, they separated them into two separate books, the book of Ezra and the book of Nehemiah. So the start of this story of God's plan to bring everybody back together, to bring his people back together, starts with Ezra describing that a man named Zerubbabel, who was rebuilding the temple. His whole job was to rebuild the temple. And then Ezra comes along, and his job is to rebuild the people. He's teaching them the Torah, teaching them all the things that they need to know, rebuilding this community. And then Nehemiah comes along. And Nehemiah's job is to rebuild the structure of the city, to rebuild specifically the wall around the city for protection. Nehemiah is sometimes confused as being a prophet. He is not a prophet. He is a leader whose job was to fulfill prophecy that had come before him. Now, Nehemiah learns, starting in Nehemiah chapter 1, Nehemiah in the first few verses, he learns of the destruction that happened. He learns that the walls in the land of his people has been destroyed, and that there are some people who survived and are not exiled but living in that area, but that the walls are gone, and he is broken up by this. He's very affected by this. And so we're going to pick up reading in Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 4. This is Nehemiah's response to hearing what had happened in his homeland. And so verse 4 says this: "As soon as I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned for days, as soon as he heard the words that the walls had been destroyed. And I continued fasting and praying before the God of heaven. And I said, O Lord God of heaven, the great and awesome God who keeps covenant and steadfast love with those who love him and keep his commandments, let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer of your servant that I now pray before you day and night for the people of Israel, your servants, confessing the sins of the people of Israel, which we have sinned against you. Even I and my father's house have sinned. We have acted very corruptly against you and have not kept the commandments, the statutes, and the rules that you commanded your servant Moses. Remember the word that you commanded your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the peoples. But if you return to me and keep my commandments and do them, though your outcasts are in the uttermost part of heaven, from there I will gather them and bring them to the place that I have chosen to make my name dwell there. They are your servants and your people, whom you have redeemed by your great power and by your strong hand. O Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight to fear your name, and give success to your servant today, and grant him mercy in the sight of this man." Nehemiah first seeks God. When he hears that this horrible thing has happened, he first seeks God in fasting and prayer. So your first fill-in on the sheet, and I know some of you like to guess what the fill-ins are going to be, so I apologize today. It's just 3 blank lines. So your first fill-in is pray. Your first fill-in is pray, like Nehemiah does here. Nehemiah seeks God in prayer before anything else. These verses kind of make it appear like this is a single prayer. One time he said this prayer, but because it happens over several days, I believe this is like a summary of the things that he was praying to God. And I want to break down his prayer a little bit because I think it's important. The way that we pray can be important. Jesus talks about it to his disciples. He gives them a way to pray, and it's kind of outlined here. The first thing he does when he goes to pray is a recognition of God. He recognizes who God is. He says, great and awesome God. He's putting himself in this mindset of this is who God is. This is the God I worship. When I'm coming to him, I am coming to a powerful God. And then he follows that up with a confession of sin. He gets himself in alignment with God. He says, I am a sinner and I have made mistakes. My people have made mistakes, and we want to align ourselves with you. I want to confess to you that we were wrong and you were right. Then he reminds God of who he is. He reminds God of who he is and his promises. And now this isn't a prayer of Nehemiah reminding God because God has suddenly forgotten who he is or the promises that he's given, but it's Nehemiah making a declaration. Nehemiah is saying, you told Moses that if we return to you, you promised Moses, if your people return to you, that you would bring us back together. And he's saying, here I am. Here I am to fulfill that promise. I see your plan. I see your will. I want to follow you. And I want to make this promise a reality of bringing these people back together. Then he makes a bold request to God. He says, "Give me success as I go before the king." And we'll get into in just a second when he goes before the king, but he makes a request to God in prayer that I think sometimes we're afraid to make. At times we approach God in this kind of meek and humble fashion, and even more like timid and unsure, like it's reverent. If I go to God as like, "Hey, God, if you have a second, like it would be cool if," and we think that we're being reverent, and really we're just being timid. And the Bible tells us in the book of Hebrews that like Nehemiah, we are to come boldly before the throne of God for help in time of need. And so Nehemiah's prayer here is beautiful and almost a perfect version of the Lord's Prayer that shows up in the book of Matthew, that Jesus tells his disciples how to pray. He gives a recognition of who God is, a declaration of God's will being done, confession of sin, and a request for help in time of need. To be in dependence on God requires that we first seek him, to pray to the creator of the universe and to seek his guidance, knowing that apart from God, we can do nothing. So after Nehemiah prays and he asks for success, he takes action. And this is going to be a theme that you'll see come up throughout this message as we go through Nehemiah, this structure of first I seek God, and then I don't sit and wait. I move forward and take action, because faith without works is dead, and Nehemiah is living this out. So God has placed a desire on Nehemiah's heart to rebuild his city, to rebuild his community, and he's following through on that calling in chapter 2. So in chapter 2, we find out what Nehemiah's job is. He works for the king, and his job is a cupbearer. So he's a cupbearer to the king, and in that time, this was a very important job. You had to be a very trustworthy person to have this job. It was to make sure that the king always had something to drink, but more importantly, that it was not poisoned, to make sure that it wasn't going to kill the king. And on this particular day, when Nehemiah is bearing cups, he's kind of mopey. And the king asks him why he's so sad. And I don't know about anyone else, but when I read the Bible, sometimes I try to fill in the gaps. There's a sentence, and I'm like, well, there's probably more going on, and what thoughts is he thinking? So I can't tell you that this is exactly what Nehemiah is doing, but I'm thinking he might be using this as a strategy. He's going to act a little mopey to give an opportunity to talk to the king. Does anyone have friends like this, or people who will all of a sudden just be sitting there and then sigh really loud and be like, and then stare at you and wait for you to ask? We do that sometimes. We're trying to get some sympathy. We're trying to get someone to ask us a question. Or if you're in my house, when my wife gets frustrated at the state of the house being in disarray and not being cleaned up, she will start to clean very aggressively and very loudly. And that's my indicator to drop whatever I'm doing and come help her clean. You guys, I never knew that folding laundry could be so loud. Who knew? I also do want to clarify, I asked her permission to tell this story, okay? So just know that. So the king asks Nehemiah, he notices, hey, he's a little bit sad today. This isn't his normal state. What's going on? And he tells him what happened. He says, my hometown, the place that my people are from, I just found out is destroyed. It's in ruins. And I need to go help fix it. So he makes a request to the king, a request to leave from his position and to go home and to fix this wall. And God shows up in a big way here because he does something that only God can do. He softens the heart of the king, and the king grants this leave. The king doesn't have to do this. He doesn't have to allow him to leave. It's an important position that he has, but he allows him to go. And not only does he allow him to go, he sends resources with him. He sends a bunch of letters with him that say, hey, if anyone you run into on the road says you're not allowed to be here, here's a letter with the king's seal on it that says you're fine to go this way. And not only that, he gives them some people to go along with him. He gives them some officers and some horsemen and kind of this small military for protection while he travels. And not only that, but he allows him to take wood from the king's forest in order to repair the walls. So he gives him kind of everything he needs along his way, not just the permission to leave, but all the resources that he needs, because God is with him in this. So this group gets together and they start traveling to Jerusalem, and he gets there and he meets with people who are dwelling in the land, who are already living there, officials, nobles, priests. And in the middle of the night, after they've been there a couple of days, everyone's sleeping, but Nehemiah can't sleep. He's been distraught about the state of his home. He's been praying and fasting about this. He's traveled likely for 3 months or longer just to get here, and it's the middle of the night, and he can't sleep. He hasn't told anyone exactly what his plan is that he's met here, but he gets up in the middle of the night, takes a couple of close, trusted people, and goes and walks the walls, and for the first time lays eyes on these walls. Historians believe it's about a 2-mile trek around these walls, and he's seeing the rubble and the ash and that everything is burned down, and he's heartbroken by what he sees. And so he decides that it's time to take action, and he knows that he's here for a reason and that God has a plan. So once he returns in the morning, he gathers all the people around and tells them what God has revealed to him, that the city and the people are in trouble, that they're not safe, they are not protected from their enemies. In those days, if you did not have a wall around your city, you didn't have a city because it wasn't safe. And the enemies of the Israelites were already seeing what was happening and were not happy. And so Nehemiah tells all the people what God has already been doing. He says, hey, here's all the ways God has showed up, all the resources we've been given for no reason, all the ways that God is helping already make this work. And it's like every halftime speech in a sports movie. Like when the team's down and then they give this rousing speech at halftime and they all come out, everybody's all in. They're all pumped up. They're ready to help and serve. And this brings us to our second point, our second fill-in on your sheet, which is partner. Partner. So Nehemiah starts with prayer, and then he partners with those around him. He has to start to depend on the people around him. They partner together to complete the work that God has for them. And in chapter 3 of Nehemiah, they begin to build the wall. If you read chapter 3, it's really just a list of a whole bunch of people building the wall, the specific areas that they're building around the wall, and then maybe a little bit of information about them. And so there are 38 individuals listed in this chapter who all come from varying walks of life. The work is started by the high priest, the spiritual leader, and there's this domino effect as the work builds and things start getting repaired. And there's all kinds of people mentioned. There's priests, rulers, goldsmiths, there's men, there's women, there's people from different kind of ethnic backgrounds and groups, there's perfumers, there's servants, there's traders. But I want to tell you 2 significant things about this group of people. So again, this big list of people. And one is that of all the professions listed in here, none of them are in construction. There's no engineer mentioned. There's no stonemason mentioned. This is another example in this story of something that only God can do. He used a bunch of unqualified people to carry out this job. The other significant thing about this group of people is that none of them are significant. None of them are significant. They're just people in this community coming together to serve each other, to serve their city, and to serve the Lord. For instance, there's a man named Zadok in here who is mentioned as helping to build this wall. And he's not mentioned anywhere else in the Bible. This is the only spot. Often the Bible will name specific people if they have a big role in the story, or sometimes name people for genealogies. We're trying to track the line of somebody important. But Zadok, this guy, he's named here in this one spot. He helps build the wall in front of his house. And I think that's intentional, that Nehemiah named these people. He didn't write one verse that just said, hey, a bunch of people kind of helped build this wall. These people were important. They were just people who chose to step up and to do a job that was set before them. And there are some scholars that view this group of people coming together in Nehemiah and repairing this wall as a foreshadowing to the church. That this is what we do, a group of diverse people who are unqualified to carry out the task given to them by God. But because of his plan and his power and his purpose, they are carrying out that mission anyways. Church, this is what we are called to. Some of these people worked on the gates. Some, it tells us, worked on these kind of big sections. Many of them worked on the wall right in front of their house, from one edge of their property to the other edge of their property. They worked on that space. They came together with a common goal and a common purpose and served each other to carry out God's plan. Now, our plan here at Cypress, here in Sacramento, is not to build a wall, but it's to build a kingdom. It's to build a kingdom. And we can overthink our calling in life. We get obsessed with like, God, what do you have for me? What's the big thing that I'm supposed to dedicate my life to? And we get obsessed with this calling. And as a church, though, it's not that complicated. It's not that complicated. And as part of this church, a church is a group of people that come together for a common purpose to serve God. And in the church, he gave the church a very specific plan, a very straightforward plan to go into the world, starting with your neighborhood, and tell them about Jesus. That's it. And that's the point of the church. We can go so much further together than we can by ourselves. And we're dependent on one another to carry out the task that's been set before us. And too often, I think we hear the needs of the church or a call for help in the church, and we take a consumer mentality. We look around thinking, man, somebody really should do something about that. That sounds bad. Or it seems like they need some help. But we think, that's why we have pastors and deacons and leaders. Like, that's kind of their job. Or we think that we wouldn't know the first thing about serving or helping in the church. I'm not qualified to teach somebody or to plan something, or I'm kind of shy. So like greeting people at the front door, that's not really for me. And you would have fit right in with Nehemiah's construction crew. So be a Zadok. No building experience, just a reliance on God and a willingness to serve his people. He stepped up to help support the work that was being done. So your last fill-in is to participate. Participate. We should participate together. And so one other area that might get in the way of participating, one other reason that we come up with sometimes to not participate, to work together to fulfill God's plan of building his kingdom through the church, sounds a little something like this. It sounds maybe like that's not really something I'm interested in. I don't really want to help with that. Or I wouldn't really like doing that. That doesn't seem very fun. Or what would I get out of it? What would I get out of serving? Or maybe it's like, I'm too busy. I've got a lot of stuff going on. I just can't make it work. And there were a group of people in Nehemiah's day who had this attitude. So in the middle, I said chapter 3 is this long list of everyone who helped on the wall. But right in the middle, there's this one verse that sticks out that we're going to read. Nehemiah chapter 3, verse 5. Nehemiah chapter 3, verse 5. So again, it's describing this person helped build this part of the wall. This person helped build this part of the wall. And here's verse 5 right in the middle, and it says, "And next to them the Tekoites repaired, but their nobles would not stoop to serve the Lord." So a group of nobles did not help build the wall. He lists all these people that helped build it, and then these one group of people who would not help. Now, I don't know if anyone's ever worked on a team or been the leader of something or even did like a group project in school or at work. When you have that one person who's supposed to help and they don't help, it can be super frustrating. And Nehemiah has that happening here. And I'm not saying Nehemiah did this on purpose, but he chose the words that he put in there. And he took a little jab at them. He writes, "They would not stoop to serve their Lord, as if serving the Lord is beneath anyone. But they thought to themselves that they were so righteous that they could not be bothered to help on this wall." And this points out a great piece of wisdom for us today that when it comes to participating in building the kingdom of God. It wasn't written that they rejected the work that was being done or that it seemed too hard to them or that they really didn't like Nehemiah. They didn't like that leader. They didn't really like the way that the leadership was making decisions. They didn't write any of that. By not serving, they were rejecting the Lord. They were rejecting the Lord. So when you serve the kingdom of God, no matter what job, if you're leading a life group or teaching kids or cleaning a bathroom or making someone feel welcome the first time they walk through these doors, you're painting a room or you're making chicken nuggets at T&L on Thursday nights for youth group, you aren't just serving the church or the people around you, you are serving the Lord in that work. In Matthew, Jesus says, "Whatever you did for the least of these, you did for me." The service that we have, the love that we show for one another is honoring to God. So be an unqualified Zadok, rather than a noble who knows better than to fix a wall. Now, this story is, if it ended in chapter 3, it's this really beautiful story of a community of people coming together. And, it was kind of a hard job, but they got together and they built this wall. And isn't that so amazing? It's like an after-school special, like Full House or something, right? Like they do this great thing. Except that's not the end of the story. As the work continued and really picked up steam, opposition started to come in from the outside. So we're going to pick up in chapter 4. Chapter 4, verse 1 says this. It says, now when Sanballat, and this character Sanballat is mentioned earlier in this book as an enemy of Israel. He is somebody who is actively plotting against Israel and the work that they're doing. So it says, now when Sanballat heard that they were building the wall, he was angry and greatly enraged, and he jeered at the Jews. And he said in the presence of his brothers and the army of Samaria, what are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore it for themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they finish up in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of rubbish and burned ones at that? Tobiah the Ammonite was beside him and said, yes, what they are building, if a fox goes up on it, he will break down their stone wall. So the enemies of the people become upset with the work that is being done, and they're worried about seeing the wall go up, but they mock them. It says they jeer them. They're mocking the work that they're doing. They also see a whole bunch of unqualified people doing work that they don't know how to do. And so you hear one makes the comment, he's like, yeah, but these people building a wall, if even an animal runs across it, the whole thing's going to fall down. These people do not know what they're doing. So continuing on in verse 4, this is now Nehemiah speaking. And listen to what Nehemiah does. Hear, O God, for we are despised. Turn back their taunt on their own heads and give them up to be plundered in a land where they are captives. Do not cover their guilt and let not their sin be blotted out from your sight, for they have provoked you to anger in the presence of the builders. So we built the wall, and all the wall was joined together to half its height, for the people had a mind to work. So when the enemy popped up, when the opposition arose, where did he go? He went immediately to God. He goes back to prayer, back to this theme that shows up in Nehemiah over and over. When faced with something, with opposition, he is dependent first on God. And then what does he do after that? He keeps building. He knows what he's been called to do, so he seeks God for help and then keeps moving. So when the Israelites were faced with verbal abuse from the enemy, they're getting yelled at, made fun of, all those kinds of things. They continue to pray, partner, and participate. So the enemy steps it up. They're like, all right, they're not listening to our mocking. How about something physical? And they start to plan and plot to fight against Jerusalem, to kill these people. And so what does Nehemiah do? Verse 9. Verse 9 says, and we prayed to our God and set a guard as a protection against them day and night. So again, he prays first, then takes action. Are you seeing a pattern here? He prays first, then takes action. Then continuing on in verse 10. Verse 10 is a little bit of a shift. It says, in Judah it was said, the strength of those who bear the burdens is failing. There is too much rubble. By ourselves, we will not be able to rebuild the wall. And our enemies said, they will not know or see till we come among them and kill them and stop the work. So this is a shift. The people went from working and moving forward, and now they are discouraged. Their strength is failing as the enemy closes in. Verse 6 tells us the point that they're at in this project. It says the wall was halfway done. It was halfway done. And this happens when we're in the middle of things. When we start something new, it's exciting. I get the new tennis shoes, the new outfit, I'm gonna start running. That sounds awesome. And then when we get to the end of something, we're like, oh, the marathon's coming up that I've been training for. Like I can push through to the end. That's exciting too. But sometimes when you're in the middle of something, it's difficult. It's rough, it's grueling. And this shift to discouragement when things get hard is a trap that I find myself falling into more often than I'd like to admit. Sometimes when we face opposition or when things get hard, we think that God's not in it anymore. We start to doubt what we're being called to. This got hard, so that means God must not want me here anymore. God, I was so convinced that this job was from you. I prayed and prayed and prayed, and you opened all the doors every step along the way. But now I'm here, and my boss is kind of a jerk, and those coworkers, I don't really get along with them. Why is this so difficult? It seems like you're not here anymore. Or it happens maybe in your marriage. God, when we first got married, it was great. I knew that this was the person that I was supposed to be with. But here we are years later, there's kids, the bills are piling up, and the distance between us keeps just growing more and more. What if there's something else out there? Or for me, it looks like this sometimes. God, I felt like you called me to be a pastor at this church, to be a leader at this church, but it's stressful. I put a ton of time and energy into something and it fell completely flat. There's disagreements in the church, there's struggles in the church every single day, and I've got another lesson to teach. I've got to teach the kids on Sunday, and then I'm with the high school kids on Thursday, and then, I'm preaching on Sunday, and it just gets exhausting. Maybe I'm not up for all this. The church needs me, my job needs me, my wife needs me, my kids need me. Don't be surprised when the enemy shows up. If you decide to live your life for God, to serve God, to depend on him, the enemy is going to show up. He's going to put doubts in your mind and situations in your path that will frustrate you, that will get you to quit. He's going to try to tell you this wall that you're building is a house of cards. All it takes is one animal to come across and the whole thing's going to fall apart. And when I'm in that place that I was talking about, when I'm in that zone, I tend to freeze. That's my go-to. When I'm overwhelmed and doubting, my default is to freeze and to kind of pull back and ignore everything. And Nehemiah shows us another way. He shows us a different way. When things get hard, the enemy attacks, he knows where his help comes from. It comes from God, and he goes directly to the source and puts his dependence on him and then on those around him. And this is something that I'm not great at. And I think a lot of men maybe are not so great at it, at looking for help somewhere outside of ourselves, to go to God and look for help. But even harder sometimes is to go to other people and ask for help. And this week has been a rough week for me. It's been a very busy week. It's one of those weeks where, like, you guys ever have those weeks where it seems like all the big stuff happens kind of all at the same time? It's like the kids are struggling, and I've got stuff at work that's kind of big, and I've got this sermon that I've got to prepare for. This last week has been like that for me. It's been really busy and just a lot of stuff, and I've been overwhelmed in a lot of ways. And on Wednesday night, I remembered that I'm supposed to teach the high schoolers on Thursday. And that was too much for me. It was too much for me. That was my breaking point. And I just could not fathom how I was going to get that done. And not because I don't love our high schoolers. I love spending time with our high schoolers. I love teaching that group. I love being with them. But just all the stuff that had happened, I just couldn't think of how I was going to pull this all together. And so I'm complaining to my wife about this, venting, getting support from my wife about all of this. And she just looks at me and she says, I'll do it. I'll do it. I can teach them. And she went and she taught them. And to be honest, they like her now more than they like me, which is a common experience for me with my wife. But she stepped in and I felt like God was really trying to teach me something. Like, he's like, you are literally crafting a sermon that's about depending on those around you, and you're not willing to depend on somebody else, to reach out, to ask for help. I gave you people around you that you can rely on. And even when when my wife offered, I was like, no, I'll figure it out. I've got it. It took a little bit of convincing. So when Nehemiah recognizes that his people are losing heart, he sets up protection. He takes action. He gets more people involved that they can rely on, that they can get support from. And he stations people with spears and swords and bows at every open part of the wall to provide protection. And then he gives a speech. He gives a speech like something out of Braveheart or out of Independence Day. And it's only a sentence. I wish it was a little bit longer. But it's a really, I think, inspiring speech that he gives in verse 14. We'll read verse 14 together. And it says, "And I looked and arose and said to the nobles and to the officials and to the rest of the people, 'Do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes.'" I told my wife that I wanted to read that in the Scottish accent like Braveheart, and she talked me out of it. So But he gives this speech of like, fight for each other, depend on each other. We are in this together. And with spirits renewed and a reminder that first they are dependent on God and then they can rely on each other, they get back to work. They get back to work. And the Bible tells us that they had this whole plan set up. Half of the people were working and half of them were standing guard. And even the ones that were working had a sword strapped to them. And there were others that were working that had a trowel, had a tool in one hand and had a sword in the other hand. And they were prepared. And they had a signal prepared. They had people who walked around with trumpets, and their whole job was if an area of the wall got attacked, they would blow their trumpet so everyone could rush there in order to support the work that was happening and to fight against the enemy. So they had all of these plans. Nehemiah stayed ready, but he didn't wait. He stayed ready, but he was not waiting. He knew the enemy was at work, but he didn't sit and wait for them to attack. He didn't bring everybody in and say, hey, let's just sit here and if they're going to attack, maybe it'll happen today, maybe the next day, don't stop the work. We've got to worry about being attacked. No, he came up with a plan to continue the work and to prepare to be protected from the enemy. And the enemy this morning wants you to put down your trowel, to stop building, to stop moving forward, to distract you from the work at hand. He wants to keep you too busy or too anxious or too entertained or too distracted from helping to build the wall. But we know that we are all called to be builders. They were building a wall to keep their city protected and safe, and our job is to build a kingdom that God has chosen the church to bring to the world. You have a wall to build. You have a wall to build in your home, with your family, with your kids, in your community, in your neighborhood, and you have a wall to build here at Cypress, here in this church. If you're not sure how to do that, if you're not sure how to be a builder this morning, that's okay. Neither did anyone in this story. There's no prerequisites, no courses you have to take, no prior experience, no qualifications that you need, because we serve a God who is the master builder. Let me tell you something interesting. When I was studying this message, I was looking at Jesus, and Jesus is described as a carpenter. That was the job that he had. That was what his father did, and that was what his earthly father did, and that's what he was trained to do, was to be a carpenter. And that word that was translated to carpenter is the word tekton. And a better translation or a better understanding of the word might be a little more general than carpenter, like a builder or a craftsman or a handyman. And we often think in our culture of a carpenter as someone who works with wood. But in the areas that Jesus lived, in Judea and Galilee, there was not a lot of wood. There was no forest there, and most of the homes would have been built from rock. So it's likely that Jesus was actually a stonemason more than a carpenter. So if you find yourself looking at a wall that needs to be built in your life or in this church and wondering how to do it or where you fit in, remember that we have a builder, a craftsman, a stonemason's example to follow. Fully God and fully man, Jesus came down to earth to show us the way. And when you put your faith and trust in Jesus as your Savior and decide to live your life in pursuit of Him, when you make that decision, a piece of Him lives inside of you to help guide and direct you and to show you where to go. In church, we have a job set before us to help people find, build, and share a passionate relationship with Jesus. And we do this together, first by being dependent on God. He is the vine, we are the branches, and apart from Him, we can do nothing. And through His plan, the plan that He made as a church, we have to work together in order to reach the world. So my ask this morning is that you join us here in this church, that you join us at Cypress in doing this work together. So we're gonna stand in a second and we're gonna continue to sing and we're gonna continue to worship our God. And when we do that, I want you to take a moment like Nehemiah did and first pray. Take a moment to pray, to reach out to God to say, where do you want me to be? Where is my gap to fill in? What part of the wall do you want me to build? Ask Him for that guidance, and I believe that He will give it to you.